Welcome y'all to Robin on the Farm. Today I'm going to show you how to make this delicious, soft, and easy loaf of sourdough sandwich bread. This sourdough sandwich bread is leavened by active sourdough starter and contains no commercial yeast. This is really yummy, soft, and fluffy sandwich bread. So let's just get started on the recipe. For the sourdough sandwich bread, I'm going to use my scale, but I'm also going to give you the measurement in cups in case you like baking better that way. I'm going to get started with my sourdough starter. You can see it's active and bubbly and risen, so this is ready to use. I'm going to use 65 grams or 1/3 of a cup of this starter. It's nice and thick. You can see that the top is a little bit messy, and that is because it rose a little bit too much last night and went everywhere. I got a little bit too much, so I'm going to go ahead and scoop a little bit of this out. All right, now I'm going to zero out my scale, and it's time to add the water. I'm going to use this warm to room temperature water. I'm going to use 300 grams or 1 1/3 cups of water. I'm just going to add that right to my bowl. So 300 grams. Okay, that's pretty close. And like I said, it's about 1 1/3 cups of water. Got to zero out my scale again. That's easy to forget to do, that's for sure. Now I'm going to add some olive oil. You can also use coconut oil, sunflower oil, just whatever you want. But I'm going to use 20 grams of this oil, and that is about 1½ tablespoons. Just add that into the bowl. Oh, I went a little high. It's going to be totally fine. So 25 grams is what I'm using today. Let me zero out my scale, and our next ingredient is sugar. I'm going to use 28 grams of sugar, which is about 2 tablespoons. Almost there. I do really like using a scale when I'm baking. And next we need some salt. This is my Redmond's real salt. I like it. It's this pretty pink North American ancient fine sea salt that comes out of Utah, so it's kind of cool. But I'm going to use about 2 teaspoons of salt. This is going to be 9 grams. Oh, I got to zero out my scale again. So 9 grams of salt. Here we go. Now I'm going to give these ingredients a good little mix before I add the flour. I'm using my Danish dough whisk, which is fantastic for mixing thick doughs like sourdough. So I love using this Danish dough whisk. All right, next is our flour. Now you can use bread flour, all-purpose flour, fresh milled flour, whatever you'd like to use. But today I'm using all-purpose flour. I'm going to zero out my scale, and I want 500 grams of flour. So I'm going to add 500 grams of flour. So 500 grams of flour, or about 4 cups. And these are all of our ingredients. So I'm going to take my Danish dough whisk again, and I'm going to give this dough a good mix. I'm just going to mix these ingredients until a shaggy dough forms. Just want to make sure there's no dry flour or any too wet patches. So just take a few minutes and mix your dough really well. All right, I've been mixing this dough just for about a minute, and all of the ingredients look like they've been incorporated in really well. I don't see any dry patches of flour or anything like that. This does take a little bit of muscle, so if you want to ditch the dough whisk, go ahead and just use your hands. But I think this looks good. All right, that's what you want your dough to look like. You want it to be nice and shaggy. It doesn't have to be smooth or anything like that, like your traditional yeast breads would look. Now that this dough is all mixed, I'm going to cover it with this warm, wet tea towel, and I'm going to let it sit on my countertop for 45 minutes. It's been about 45 minutes. Now this time doesn't have to be exact. You can go anywhere from 45 minutes to a couple hours. And here is our dough. This is what you want your dough to look like. Looks kind of wet, still looks shaggy. Now I'm going to do a set of stretch and folds. So it is kind of a wet dough. This is why you don't need sourdough. It's just too wet. So I'm gonna just take this from the side and pull it over to the other side. And as I do this, this dough is gonna totally transform. The texture is gonna totally change. This helps to develop the gluten, gives you a really nice texture to your sourdough bread. Can you see that texture change as I'm doing this? It's getting smooth. It doesn't look all raggedy. Oh, it's looking good. Now it is going to be really kind of a wet, sticky dough. That is perfectly fine. That is what you want your sourdough to be like. Okay, that looks good. That's all it takes. This is just one set of stretch and folds. Now I'm just going to kind of turn it over in this bowl. Now I'm going to cover it with some plastic wrap so that it doesn't dry out. And I'm going to let it sit on my countertop for 6 to 8 hours. And then it'll be time for the next step. Okay, our sourdough sandwich bread dough has been rising on my counter for about 7 hours. Look at that. It has definitely at least doubled in size, so it's looking really good. All right, I'm going to go ahead and turn it out from this bowl. I'm going to use this nice little scraper tool, helps you get it out of the bowl. I'm going to turn it out onto my dough mat. I really like this dough mat because I know that it just is nice and clean and nothing is going to get into my dough. So now it's time to shape it. I am just going to press down this dough. Press it down, get all the little air bubbles out of it. And now I like to do the head down, shoulders in method. So you pull the head down, you pull in the shoulders, and then you just keep rolling it. And you want it nice and tight. This will give you really good surface tension for your loaf of bread. It'll just give you a really pretty loaf. Okay, I'm gonna smack it a little bit. It's gonna make it easier to work with, let it relax. And now I have my cast iron loaf pan. I love my cast iron pieces and I love this cast iron loaf pan. This is my 8.5 by 4.5 and I've oiled it up really well. I poured in some olive oil and oiled it up all around the edges and the sides so that my bread doesn't stick at all. So I'm just gonna go ahead and throw this sourdough dough into this loaf pan. Now I'm going to go ahead and cover it up with this plastic wrap one more time, and I'm going to let this rise on my countertop again for about 2 hours. So in about 2 hours, it should be risen nicely, and I'll show it to you then. My sourdough sandwich bread has been rising on the counter for about 2 hours. Let's go ahead and get this plastic wrap off. Look at that, it has risen really nicely. It's peeking up over the edge of the bread loaf pan, and I know that it's time to go into the oven. So I have my oven preheated to 375 degrees, and I'm gonna let this bake for about 35 minutes. Our loaf of sourdough sandwich bread is finally ready after all these hours, but it looks really good, it smells really good. You know what I totally forgot to do? I meant to score the top of this before I put it in the oven. That would have helped. It would have been a little bit prettier of a shape, but it's totally fine. You really don't have to do that. And sometimes I do it and sometimes I don't, but I did intend on doing that. But this is what I like to do. I like to get my bread out of the loaf pan right after I get it out of the oven. Just slides right out because I had my cast iron well oiled, so that is great. Okay, look how good this loaf of bread looks. Oh, doesn't it look good? And it's so soft and squishy. Ooh, this looks good. Okay, I have my little cast iron melting pot. I have a little bit of butter melted in there. And I'm just gonna brush the butter all over the top of this crust. I like to do that because it gives you that pretty shine, gives you a nice soft crust, and it'll give you that really good buttery flavor, which everybody likes that. Okay. Now you can put your bread on a cooling rack if you want to do that, but what I like to do is I like to just cover it with a tea towel, and all that warmth and the condensation will give you a really nice soft crust, and that is what I like for my bread. So I'm gonna let this cool just for a little bit and then I'll cut into it and we'll check out the inside. Here's our loaf of sourdough sandwich bread. Now I made this loaf yesterday and I got it out of the oven at 10 o'clock last night. So I just went ahead and I let it cool all night, and I am dying to cut into this bread because it is soft, and it smells so good. Now this did take all day. It wasn't very hands-on, but it did take a good amount of time to make this bread. If you're looking for a quicker recipe for sourdough sandwich bread, I also have a really good recipe for sourdough discard sandwich bread, and that bread is ready in less than 2 hours. That bread uses active or inactive sourdough starter, or the discard, and also some commercial yeast. And that'll just make it rise really fast, so it's ready in just a couple hours. So that's a good option too. But this is real sourdough sandwich bread, and it is gonna be so good. So let's go ahead and just cut into this bread. I can smell it. It smells that tangy sourdough tang. Oh, I just think that's the best. Okay, there it is. Look how good that looks. Let me cut into another slice so we get the real full effect. All right, let's check out this centerpiece. Oh, look at that. This bread is soft and light and fluffy. It smells like sourdough. It smells so good. This is gonna be fantastic for sandwiches. Okay, my favorite part is the heel. I like the heel of the bread, so I'm gonna take a little bite of this. It's incredible. This bread does take a little bit of time to make, but really there's not very much hands-on time. And really you're just letting your dough sit and allowing that active sourdough starter to leaven your bread. So this bread is fantastic. So if you're wanting to make a really good loaf of sourdough sandwich bread, give this recipe a try. I'll leave the recipe down in the description. You can print it off, share it, save it. Please share this with your friends and family. I would appreciate that so much. Now, if you're looking for a really easy, traditional, rustic, round sourdough loaf, I have a recipe for 5-hour sourdough bread. It's so simple, it's so easy. It's one of my most popular recipes. I will link that recipe and I'll leave it down in the description too so you can try it out. It's great for beginners. Thank you so much for being here with me on Robin on the Farm. I will see you next time.
Robin's in the kitchen, dough beneath her hands, wheat from the fields and eggs from her land. Sunlight through the window, a warm golden glow. She's working hard to make that dough. With flour on her apron, loving each need, ground wheat fresh, sowing her seed. The smell of fresh bread